Beyond the Gates spoilers tease that the interrupted broadcast only sharpened the edge on everything that followed. Because leaks don't just survive, they metastasize. The chatter coalesces around one thing: Allison's kidnapping of Chelsea, the abduction that bent the show's timeline, shoved the city into a hush, and set the stage for a round of moves that won't reset with credits. Chelsea is safe, yes, pulled out of a locked room maze just in time. But safe is a technicality when sleep turns to glass and every shadow looks like a hand. Allison's next move stops being theoretical as soon as the teaser hits. Allison in handcuffs, orange jumpsuit skimming the floor, chin up like she's the one doing intake on the system. And then Vernon, the politician who usually speaks like words are contracts, says a line that puts a chill on the room. The line isn't shouted. He doesn't need to shout. He stands in the fluorescent wash of a courthouse hallway and breathes, "We weren't supposed to catch her yet." That's the fault line under everything. Why would he say that? Why would any public figure, let alone someone who has ridden out scandals like storms, risk the backlash of sounding almost sorry the arrest happened? Snapshots freeze. Microphones jerk forward. Aides reach for his sleeve. He pinches the bridge of his nose like he knows exactly what he's just admitted and exactly what he can't afford to explain. The internet spins clips into conspiracy. But inside the story, the line is less a confession than a map. Because if Allison expected the cuffs, if she wanted to be boxed, the box isn't a punishment. It's a staging area. Wind backward and the problem starts where the rules bent. Jacob, the detective who learned procedure the way a surgeon learns anatomy, let his spine soften when Kat pressed him to move early. Kat's good sharp eyes, instincts tuned to something more than evidence. Good instincts aren't chain of custody. When Chelsea's signal pinged out of that derelict service corridor beneath the old transit annex, the right play was to seal the grid, set the perimeter, let the team roll with cameras and witnesses. The play they ran instead was Jacob and Kat shoulder-lamping their way through a warren of shuttered gates and dead emergency lights, calling Chelsea's name in voices that hoped for echo and got none. They found her hands bruised, eyes distant, gag smelling like industrial cleaner, but they walked through two unsecured doors and didn't log the time on the corridor camera. They cut tape off a secondary latch without photographing the knot. They freed her and lost details a jury would have needed. They gained a life, and they dropped a protocol. Allison knew what they'd do because Allison had been studying them long before they ever said her name out loud. Chelsea's rescue happens like a fire that doesn't realize it's burning a museum. The point is survival. The ruins get catalogued later, and by then the exhibits are ash. She's wrapped in a jacket. She's carried up a stairwell that smells like cold copper and dust. Her face is a wet shimmer in a paramedic's overhead bulb. She keeps asking the same question: is anyone else here? And it's a question no one answers because the team is split between joy and fear. Jacob breathes, "You're safe," but what he means is "we're not done." Kat scans for a second figure because Chelsea's eyes hold the afterimage of another person, someone who leaned out of frame whenever a camera whirred. Allison's voice was a constant, Chelsea says between sips of water and tremors, but there were moments when a second voice murmured from behind the vent. Feminine, flattened by metal, counting in pairs. 2 taps, 2 footsteps, 2 heartbeats. Chelsea counted back to stay sane. 2 taps for yes, 2 for no. Sometimes the counting stopped, and that's when the game felt like falling. Allison's arrest doesn't close anything. The teaser plays it like the final move. The cut of the cuffs, the slam of the door, her eyes steady on the lens that watches everyone but her. But then there's Vernon, and there's the line, and the ground lists. The question becomes why a politician is more worried after the arrest than before. Why a man who can sit stone-faced through budget hearings and smear campaigns goes pale at the exact moment the public expects relief. The guess is an easy one: Jacob's deviation, Kat's nudge, the sloppy rescue, the chain of custody holes big enough to drive a reasonable doubt through. People assume the fear is legal. People assume the fear is optics. But Vernon's face isn't the face of a man fretting over headlines. It's the face of a man who knows what gates are for. The show has always treated gates as more than doors. Gates keep things in, sure, But they also keep timing. Open too soon and you get a flood. Open too late and you get a pressure burst that rips the hinges. Vernon's comment hints that Allison's arrest tripped the timing. The yet is the giveaway. She was supposed to be outside longer. She was supposed to run, not because he wanted her free, but because whoever he's tracking, whoever stands one layer behind the curtain only moves when she's moving. On the board, she's the queen that lures the rook out of its corner. In a cell, she's harmless. On the street, she's bait. Catch her too fast and the hand on the other piece freezes. If that's the calculus, then the arrest is a success and a failure in the same breath, a PR victory that puts the real target back to sleep. What complicates the simple blame Jacob and Kat narrative is that they didn't move early for nothing. The leak that drew them down into that corridor wasn't random. It had a signature, a snipped security feed looping 3 minutes of empty hallway, then 30 seconds of static, then the sound of Chelsea's shoes scraping concrete. It was a breadcrumb trail designed to be found by exactly the kind of cop Jacob is when fear beats out patience. Kat saw the pattern too late. By the time she said wait, Jacob had already eaten the trail. And if the leak was designed to be found, then the capture that followed was part of the plan. Allison, after all, is a curator. She arranges moments in glass cases and lets people look. Getting arrested in a corridor she lit herself is the kind of performance she'd sell tickets to if the venue allowed it. The immediate risk crystallizes in a courthouse hearing. Beta visuals leak. Allison in orange, wrist scuffed, public defender who's either a placeholder or a mask for someone fanged, a judge whose patience is measured in seconds. The prosecution lays out fragments, the gag, the fibers, the scrape on Chelsea's wrists that matches a zip tie brand carried by a single hardware store chain, the digital crumbs that stitch Allison to the corridor's power grid. The defense does what defense does when procedure is porous. It asks how Chelsea was removed from the scene, whether photos were taken before the tape was cut, whether the knot was preserved, whether the first responding officer logged the time on the corridor camera or simply glanced and guessed. It asks who touched the door, who used a glove, who didn't. Jacob knows every answer, and every answer proves he valued breath over evidence and saved a life while risking a case. The defense aggregates doubt. The judge is stern but not blind to the moral math. Allison is remanded for the moment, but words like bail and conditional release hover. The law is a scale, and emotion doesn't get to sit on either plate. Chelsea watches this not from the gallery but from a room her therapist picked for its soft corners and unthreatening colors. The TV is small. The sound is low. Her fingers press the edges of a ceramic mug until heat gives her something to anchor to. She keeps seeing the corridor, not fresh but as a series of textures, the burr on the edge of the vent, the seam in the wall where someone once repaired a crack and never painted it over, the plastic clip Allison used to secure a cable bundle, how that clip clicked like a metronome when Allison tapped it. The show doesn't lean into gore or shock, it leans into repetition. Chelsea's trauma lives in those clicks and counts. The days of her confinement aren't remembered as one block but as a series, click click, footstep footstep, breath pretend then nothing, a silence that stretches so long it feels like falling without landing. Her therapist, Mara, knows how to keep someone from living in the fall. She talks Chelsea through grounding. Count what you can see. List what you can smell. Touch the mug. Feel the clay. Yes, that's a siren outside. No, it's not for you. The city is loud, but it's not a threat. The danger is contained. Allison is in a cell. These are statements Mara repeats because trauma doesn't learn by hearing. It learns by habit. But habit is brittle when the TV shows the person who taught you to count smiling at a camera like she's immune to locks. Chelsea starts sleeping in the afternoon because daylight feels less dangerous. She drags the couch against the door, not because she believes a couch will stop a plan but because it gives her arms something to do. When reporters cluster outside her building, she stops opening the curtains. When an envelope without a stamp slides under her door, she doesn't touch it for an hour. When she finally opens it, 3 typed words land like a migraine: See you soon. The envelope becomes evidence. The envelope also becomes a weight in her pocket that she can't stop carrying. It's proof she isn't imagining the persistence of whoever sits behind Allison. It's proof that rescue solved one problem and uncovered another with longer fingers. Kat takes the note and snaps it into a plastic sleeve. Jacob swabs the inside edge of the flap, but whoever licked it didn't. The glue is water activated, applied with a brush the same kind used to clean small model parts. They're not dealing with improvisation. They're dealing with hobbyist precision. The station board fills with tacks and thread. The city map becomes a web of red lines extending from the transit annex to a cluster of addresses that share no obvious owner, only one recurring contractor, Dupree Civic Holdings. The Dupree name carries a weight the show has been saving. It's old money, stitched into everything that looks public but isn't: benches with plaques, playground renovations, shuttle buses that say community on the side and profit in the ledger. Rumors start to hum again: offshore accounts, a black site rehab facility north of the river where withdrawal is a cover word for reprogramming, a trust that funds a dozen nonprofits and a dozen campaigns. The whispers point at Vernon because his last campaign ran on neighborhood reform, and the glossy brochure photos were printed under a Dupree watermark. He's the one who can get you a footbridge, a stoplight, a clinic expansion, and a budget note that no one reads because it's buried under 4 pages of acronyms. When the rumors flare, he stays calm. That's his brand. But when the accident happens, calm drops. Kat and Jacob aren't together when the car flips. They're leaving the station, different doors, different plans. It's late. Rain shines the street into a smear of mercury. Jacob's sedan takes the east ramp toward the river, a lane he's driven so often the guardrails look like cribs he can name. Kat is 3 cars back, not following, just adjacent. A delivery truck brakes hard when a dog leaps from the median. The truck stops straight. The compact behind it doesn't. It fishtails. Rubber screams. The compact clips Jacob's rear quarter, and the sedan spins. In a perfect world, he taps the brake and straightens. In this world, he catches the guardrail at an angle that turns steel into a knife. The car lifts and flips twice. When it lands, the windshield coughs glass. Airbags bloom like white fists. Everything is sound and then no sound. When Kat crawls out through a rain river and trips toward Jacob's car, she doesn't feel her own blood. She hears Jacob making a noise that isn't a word. She starts talking for both of them. In the hospital, the immediate verdict is mechanical: ribs, concussion, bruising that will paint them like topography for weeks. No spinal damage, no internal bleed that the scan can find. Lucky, a nurse says, and Kat laughs in a way that makes the nurse look down at her shoes and apologize. Lucky is a scale word the same way justice is. For the case, the timing is sabotage by coincidence. Logan, the mechanic who volunteers for cops because his brother died in a crosswalk, looks at the pictures of the wreck later and says something soft about how clean the spin was. Not staged, not exactly. But anyone who wanted to ensure a delay would choose rain and night and a timid driver ping-ponging off a truck. He doesn't say orchestrated. He doesn't need to. The implication hangs like steam on cold glass. Vernon hears about the accident from 2 sources: the official text that pings his secure phone with the time and intersection, and the unofficial call that uses the name he grew up with instead of the one on the yard signs. They're okay, the caller says first, because that's how people talk when death is an inch away but didn't take it. They're okay, but it's begun. What is it? He doesn't ask because he already knows. It is pressure. It is the thing you plan for and tell yourself will never actually arrive because you made enough packs to keep it sleeping. It is the family that can hold a city without ever appearing in a photo. The heat on the Dupree name comes from small sparks first. A contractor goes missing after complaining about late payments. A city inspector resigns 3 days before a vote on a transit privatization plan and moves his family out of state without forwarding an address. A foundation gala gets cancelled out of respect for community concerns, but no one can say what the concerns are in a sentence with verbs. Blogs fill the gap with adjectives. Protesters gather outside the glass tower that houses Dupree Civic Holdings headquarters, and a row of security guards in black jackets makes a line that looks like an underline under a sentence the company won't read out loud. In the middle of this, Vernon's inbox fills with messages that begin with a friendly greeting and end with a reminder of favors. He recognizes a few senders. He doesn't recognize the rest, which is worse. The worry that grips him isn't just the fear that Jacob's errors will let Allison breathe outside air between hearings. It's the knowledge that Allison, out or in, isn't the last door. She might not even be the penultimate door. He thinks in layers because politics taught him that in the absence of transparency, structure is the only visible geometry. Layer 1, Allison. Layer 2, the person Chelsea heard behind the vent. Layer 3, a logistics web that rents storage units within a mile of 3 separate transit hubs. Layer 4, a funding stream that begins with a charitable trust and ends with miscellaneous professional services. Beyond that, the layers turn theoretical, and theory where people are bleeding isn't a comfort. He can live with people being angry at him. He can't live with people being right. Chelsea's crisis intensifies when the word bail stops hovering and lands. The hearing isn't a surprise. Her therapist prepared her. The city prepared itself. The courthouse steps look like a concert stage. Reporters check lenses. Activists ready placards that say things like "Believe survivors" and "Do your job" in fonts that read from a block away. Inside, the defense is all calm sentences and case law. The prosecutor counters with risk of flight, danger to the community, the psychological harm to a victim still processing what was done to her. The judge listens, then sets a number that makes people gasp and conditions that make people exhale. Ankle monitor, passport surrendered, house arrest at a verified address, no contact with the victim, no access to social media, no devices that can control or disable cameras. On paper, it's stringent. In practice, it's exactly the game Allison likes to play. I will live inside your rules and show you how rules are lines you think are walls. Chelsea doesn't watch the end of the hearing. She is in a windowless room trying to keep her pulse from climbing into her eyes. She asks the same question she asked when they cut the tape. Is anyone else here? Mara says yes. She points to the chair she's sitting in and the plant in the corner and the thermostat that makes the hum she can hear through the wall. She turns the terrifying into mundane. Chelsea nods. She bites her lip. She wants to be strong for the cameras in case one finds her. She decides not to walk out the front of the building. Strength can include not being seen. Jacob and Kat are present at the hearing in bodies that look like they've been through a grinder and minds that won't admit to fog. They sit on opposite sides of an aisle like a line drawn through guilt. Jacob's arm is in a sling. Kat's temple wears a butterfly bandage like a piece of evidence she can't file. Both of them know the hearing is less about Allison and more about whether their earlier choices will be allowed to stand as understandable rather than inexcusable. The judge doesn't scold them by name, but the implications land. After, in the hallway, Jacob leans against a column and whispers that he hears the crash every time he blinks. Kat says she can hear Chelsea counting when the room goes quiet. 2, Kat says. Always 2. He knows what she means without needing her to explain. When Allison steps through the courthouse doors with an ankle monitor blinking like a heartbeat at her ankle bone, the crowd breaks into halves, those who chant and those who stare. She doesn't look at either half, she looks at the lens of a single camera positioned low, not one of the official ones. Her smile is a half-inch movement, like she's signaling to someone who speaks a language of minor angles. The word people use for her is unbothered, but that's imprecise. She's bothered. She's electric with bother. She just refuses to show it in the currencies the crowd wants. I'll follow every rule, she says to a mic that someone shoves forward, and she almost laughs because everyone knows rule following is a costume she wears like silk. She climbs into a black SUV that idles for exactly 14 seconds before pulling away. The plates belong to a private car service with a contract for hospital shuttles, city meetings, and, conveniently, home confinement transport. The driver wears a hat that hides his eyes. The car doesn't take her to the most obvious address. It takes her to a townhouse owned by a Shell LLC that connects to a portfolio that connects to the Dupree Trust. The signal on her monitor pings to a base that sits in a room with opaque blinds. The first night, nothing happens. The second night, The light over her stoop flickers in a sequence that looks random until Jacob, staring at footage at 3 in the morning, realizes the pattern aligns with the 2-beat rhythm Chelsea heard: unknown, off-off, unknown, off-off. He pauses the video on the moment the light holds steady and sees a reflection in the townhouse window. It's not a face. It's the seam of a curtain moving in a way wind doesn't move fabric. He prints the frame and puts it on the board under a line that reads "Who is behind the vent?" Vernon studies the board because sometimes the simplest way to look honest is to actually help. He is helpful when the cameras are rolling. He promises resources. He funds an expanded task force with discretionary funds he pretends came from nowhere and actually came from a pocket he's been lining for just such a day. He calls in favors from people who owe him and from people who never will. He sits with Jacob and Kat and traces the red lines with a finger he can't stop from shaking. "We weren't supposed to catch her yet," he says again. But this time it's not a slip. It's a strategy note. He explains the idea of tempo to 2 people who already learned it the hard way. "There's a bigger hand," he says, "and it doesn't move when she's gauged. It changes shape. It makes accidents. It invents envelopes." The 2 of them stare at him like they're weighing whether to accept help from a man they suspect could also be the problem. Kat asks the question directly because indirect questions only waste time. "What do you owe Dupree?" He doesn't lie. He lists a bridge repair, a clinic expansion, a pilot program that brought nurses into schools, a community center renovation that opened last summer with a ribbon cut wide enough to forgive a dozen sins. He lists dollar amounts and the way they were filtered through 7 entities so no one could point to the one check that made a difference. And then he lists the thing he has never put on paper: a second phone number he was told to call in the event of unrest involving any project that crossed into transit or public safety. "I called it once," he says, "a few months ago. After the transit annex leak. I asked if anyone had seen anything unusual around the tunnels. The man who answered said the word unusual is unhelpful. He told me to define it. I defined it. He told me everything was fine." Kat asks whether he recorded the call. He says no. Jacob asks whether he knows the man's name. He says no, but he knows the sound of the man exhaling smoke into the receiver even though you're not supposed to smoke inside office towers anymore. The detail isn't useful until it is. They add it to the board like a joke clue that becomes prophecy. Chelsea's days fold into a pattern that alternates between trying to rebuild and being yanked backward by reminders she can't anticipate. She goes to a grocery store and ends up crouching in the produce section because the mist that sprays the lettuce sounds like the static on the corridor recording. She throws the lettuce out when she gets home because the bag makes the same crinkle as the plastic covering Allison used on the chair. She starts boiling water for tea not because she likes tea but because the whistle tells her there's something she can control that will always end. In the quiet, she drafts a victim impact statement that isn't for court yet but serves as a map of what was done. The draft reads like an inventory. She lists items: a ring with a scratch, a scarf that still smells like the room she was held in, a phrase she can't say anymore because Allison said it first. She writes a sentence and deletes it. She writes the sentence again and keeps it. "I do not forgive you," it says, and she isn't sure who the "you" is meant for. The city's rumor engine keeps grinding. A cousin of the Dupree heirs vanishes on a sailing trip and returns with a medical excuse and a new devotion to privacy. A whistleblower claims a rehab facility built for patients who never existed, but the files necessary to prove it vanish in a flood caused by a burst pipe no plumber can confirm. A private school headmaster resigns after a donation raises questions about whether admissions is a curvy road or a straight line. The show doesn't ask you to memorize all the details, it asks you to feel the fog. Inside that fog, facts hide. Inside the fog, people like Allison can reappear as if they were always there. Night slides into another hearing day, and Vernon stands in a hallway framed by pillars and choices. He's just hung up after another call where the voice on the other end took 3 beats between sentences like he was counting the same way Chelsea did. He wants to walk into the hearing room and tell the judge what he suspects: that the arrest came too soon by the design of the person it should have trapped, that the evidence was meant to breathe just enough to win a release, that the city is being led by the nose. Instead he finds a podium and gives the kind of speech politicians give when they can't say the real thing. Safety, healing, accountability, independent review, words like bricks he can stack into a short, square shelter. He promises to protect the investigation from interference, as if he isn't interference wearing a tie. He doesn't mention Dupree. He doesn't mention the number he called. He walks away before anyone can ask the question he's not ready to answer. The crisis peaks not in a courtroom but in a living room where the blinds are closed and the air feels like waiting. Chelsea has brought herself to watch the footage of Allison exiting the courthouse again because avoidance makes monsters. She pauses the video and looks not at Allison but at a bystander who appears for a second in the background, a woman with a red scarf, the exact shade Allison used to blindfold her when the corridor lights flickered. It could be a coincidence. It could be a choice. Chelsea rewinds. She plays it again. The scarf is there and then gone, as if it was only ever meant to be seen once, by one pair of eyes. Chelsea's hands shake. She hits call. Kat answers on the second ring. It's not over, Chelsea says, and the words sound obvious and also like a bell. Jacob is already moving. He's been tracking the SUV's routes since the second day of house arrest, mapping the car service's other pickups, searching for patterns that would suggest a wider net. The routes look random until they don't. Hospitals, city offices, a certain kind of private school with a certain kind of tuition. He pins a photo of each building and draws a line that makes no sense on a map but makes perfect sense if you angle the city 90 degrees in your head. The line passes through a stretch of sidewalk with a plaque that says the Dupree family funded the renovation of the corridor underneath to improve emergency access. He sees the word corridor and hears Chelsea counting. He calls Kat. The gates aren't doors, he says. They're routes. She's halfway through agreeing when the station lights pop and go dark for half a second, long enough to make every screen in the room blink. When they come back, every camera feed tied to the townhouse where Allison is confined shows static. Not black, not off. Static white, bright, loud even with the sound muted. The ankle monitor pings like normal. The feed says, "Look away." Vernon gets an alert on his secure phone that reads like a storm watch minor outage, anticipated duration 30 seconds, cause unknown, no action required. He stares at the words until they become meaningless shapes. The last time his phone used that exact language was the night a storage warehouse caught fire on the edge of a Dupree redevelopment zone and 10 boxes of paper evidence turned to damp ash. He doesn't have room left inside himself for coincidence. He grabs his coat. He tells his aide to cancel the rest of the day. He walks out into a city that looks like itself and, for the first time, feels like its blueprint has been rotated. The move that follows isn't big enough to make a headline, at least not at first. It's a door opening on a townhouse in the quiet blue of early morning, a door that isn't supposed to open because the person inside is supposed to be inside. It's a shadow crossing a threshold and disappearing into the backseat of a second car that waited with its lights off. A car that belongs to a caterer on the books and a courier off them. It's a woman in a red scarf leaning in to say something to the shadow and then walking away the other direction, scarf trailing, the end of it brushing the prickly leaves of a hedge trim to municipal exactitude. The ankle monitor pings like nothing changed. Chelsea wakes from a dream in which she has 2 hearts and only one beats at a time. Kat pours coffee and lets it go cold. Jacob circles the block on his map with a red pen and presses so hard the tip tears paper. Somewhere below street level, a light flickers twice and then holds steady, as if a system just finished booting. As if the real gate just slid open.